Hi. When people who read my book ask me what other books to read to become better investors, I often tell them to read old historians like Thucydides, Xenophon, or Plutarch. Why? Because battles among empires are not very different from battles among companies. If you can make the right analogy to historical conflicts, you often can have an edge in picking stocks too. Let me give you an example of such a stock that may rise 2, maybe even 3 times from here, if my analogy is correct and if your due diligence confirms it. The stock is Huntington Ingalls, HII, one of the oldest shipyards in the US, founded in 1884. Now, what is the historical analogy? It's the unavoidable fight between the two empires of Sparta and Athens. And the connection to today? Well, for more than a year, I've been telling you a conflict between China and the US is inevitable. What's important for you as an investor is that the US will embark on a huge shipbuilding program, and Huntington Ingalls will likely benefit for it, as will its stock. But just how inevitable is the US-China conflict? In my view, it's a near certainty. The reason for the coming escalation of conflict is twofold. The first reason is what's called the Thucydides trap, and the second is China's 100 years of humiliation. Let's go into 2 reasons in some detail. First, the Thucydides trap. The term was coined by Thucydides, the first historians who wrote about the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. Those days, around 430 BC, Sparta was the established military power, while Athens was the rising power. Both lived warily side by side, trying to avoid direct fighting. But this wary peace was maintained only until Athens grew so powerful that it almost matched Sparta. Then, said Thucydides, a war between them became inevitable because both feared domination by the other. This inevitability of conflict became known as the Thucydides trap. And why is it relevant today? You probably guessed it already. The established empire today is, of course, the US. The rising power is China. So Thucydides' trap today dictates that conflict between them is unavoidable. But you may ask, is it really unavoidable? Can't they just get along via some diplomacy? This is what Henry Kissinger recommends, and a few other like-minded people. But whether he is right or not does not matter anymore, because both Kissinger and other compromisers have been losing influence and power, both in the US and in China. In the US, Donald Trump fired 2 weeks ago by email the entire policy board of the Pentagon, a sort of board of directors, among whom were Kissinger, as well as Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice, all of them previous secretaries of state. The new Pentagon board is composed of pure hawks, including Newt Gingrich and one Ed Luttwak, the world's foremost authority on coup d'etat, which means rebellions by second in command. Both are now advising the Pentagon as well as Trump. None is a compromiser. What of China? There, Xi Jinping has been made into a virtual dictator for life. He too is not a compromiser. Now mind, the coming US-China conflict may not be what the military call kinetic war, i.e. a shooting war with missile, rockets, tanks, and planes. Rather, today's conflicts are a modern combination of propaganda, political interference, bribing of officials, tariff warfare, and cyber warfare, like interfering with each other's elections and communications. In fact, people I know in Washington have been calling the voting machine's alleged hacking a modern-day cyber Pearl Harbor, launched by China together with European and American institutional allies against the US government. Was it really? Or is the accusation fake? Who knows? I, of course, cannot tell. But it's clear that the tension between the US and China is rising, and the rising is increasing. And the people in charge in both empires are now the hardcore, with the more moderate ones, the compromisers, pushed aside. Now, why would all this lead to shipbuilding spree? Because there's pressure in this direction, both in the US and in China. And like Sparta and Athens, each has its strong reason. The US Navy has a long tradition of aiming for maritime superiority based on the famous doctrine by Admiral Alfred Mann, M-A-H-A-N, whose book Projecting Naval Power is the primer in nearly all world's Navy colleges, including the US. During the administrations of Obama and Clinton, the US Navy has been reduced in both number of ships and in comparative advantage over China. It is still the biggest, but the advantage is growing slimmer. On top, China has been trying to secure foreign ports for its Navy, both in Africa and in Europe, which threatens the US global naval power monopoly. So for the US, the impetus for growing its Navy is strong, both more ships and more submarines. What about the Chinese motives? First, China expressed a desire to supplant the US as primary global power. But even deeper than that, China has a psychological need not to repeat the experience of its century of humiliation. You see, from the mid-18th into mid-19th centuries, for 100 years, foreign countries like Japan and Russia could conquer parts of China with impunity and force on it humiliating treaties, basically tell it what to do. Britain did even worse. It forced China to buy opium despite China's great reluctance to do it, then taxed the future sales and even floated bonds on these future tax revenues of reluctant buying. How is that for national humiliation? That century of easy victories by foreigners left a deep mark on China's psyche, and many Chinese leaders vowed it will never happen again. So China is now building its military with a stress on the Navy so as not to be humiliated again, just like a formerly skinny kid lifting weights so no one can kick sand in his face. The US, of course, will endeavor to more than match China's shipbuilding program, and it will grow its number of ships and subs substantially, which brings me again to Huntington Ingalls, HII. Founded in 1884, it is the oldest US shipyard with deep ties with the US Navy going back generations. It designs, builds, overhauls, and repairs military ships from amphibious assault ships, deck amphibious ships, and transport dock ships, surface combat ships, cutters for both the US Navy and the US Coast Guard, in short, the whole gamut. On top, it also provides refueling and overhaul services to nuclear-powered ships, both aircraft carriers and submarines, and support the nuclear navy, both on shore and at sea. As it's quite clear, Huntington Ingalls is part and parcel of the US naval empire, and its stock has grown alongside the US Navy. Just look at the chart. However, the last few years, the stock languished. From a peak of 261, it fell to 147, although it popped recently to 162 with the market rise. A weak pop, but it is still well below the peak. And if my analogy of the US and China to Sparta and Athens is correct, the coming US-China conflict will bring in a lot more revenues to Huntington Ingalls, and the stock could go even higher than the previous peak. The shipbuilding budgets, I am told, are even now making their way through congressional committees. How high can the stock go? If it benefits from the shipbuilding boom and its margins reach past level, it can double from here, perhaps more. Value lines see the stock reaching 380 in 3 to 5 years, but this, in my view, could possibly be modest. That's because not just surface ship contracts are coming, but also contracts for submarines. The US, along with many other nations, is now upgrading a great number of submarines, and Huntington enjoys the dominant position as a Navy contractor for subs. More than 70% of the active US fleet consists of Huntington Ingalls ships, and the company is one of the only 2 contractors in the world equipped to build nuclear power submarines. The fiscal 2021 defense budget already earmarks $4.4 billion, that's billion with a B, especially for a Columbia-class submarine, with Huntington Ingalls Newport News shipbuilding unit jointly building this submarine with General Dynamics Electric Boat Division. This is probably an indication of the sub-business growth ahead. On top, recently Huntington got a $2.2 billion modification contract for supporting the construction of 2 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines. The main contract, again, was awarded by General Electric, GD Electric Boat Division, for whom Huntington acted as a subcontractor. I think it's likely that more contracts may follow, as the US and China are getting into a tighter and fiercer conflict that may last quite a number of years. Now mind, as usual, the above is not a recommendation, just an example on which you could perform your own due diligence and sleuthing. That's all for today. Let me know in the comment below what you think of the above. Subscribe to the channel. Email the video to your friends if you like it, so they subscribe too. I'll see you next time. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and a Happy New Year to you and yours.